Hello and welcome to this webinar for new coaches within McKinnon Basketball Association's domestic competition. My name's Darren Anderson, the Director of Coaching for McKinnon Basketball, and looking forward in the next 30 to 40 minutes to introducing you to some of the key things that you'll need to know as a domestic coach within our association, and hopefully you find some value from what we cover. In this session, we're going to be covering a variety of areas. We'll start off with some tips on how you can start your season successfully as a new coach within our competition. We'll also talk about being child-centered, what that looks like, and also some key points around being child-safe as a coach. Obviously, with new child safety legislation in Victoria, it's important that we are doing our best as coaches to make sure we provide safe and positive experiences for the children we're coaching. A lot of that happens within training sessions, and so we're going to be talking about some ways you can deliver engaging and effective training sessions, talk about the key skills that you'll need to be delivering for your kids, and some ways you can structure activities and direct you to some resources to help you with that as well. We'll be talking about the basic skills and tactics that you should be looking to teach your players. We'll talk about some game day features, some substitutions, timeouts, some rules within the McKinnon Basketball Association's domestic competition to help you hit the ground running. And at the end, we'll talk about some resources for new coaches as well that'll help you with lots of drills, games, activities to run with your team and have a successful season. So it's important we start the season positively. There's a few things that I would be thinking about in the first few weeks of your season. The first thing is around welcoming and communicating well with your parent group. They're going to be a really key group for you to manage and work with, a great ally for you across the season. So ideally, you could meet with them as a group in person, but the reality is for a domestic coach, it might just be that you're sending them an email at the start of the season. Within that, it's important you frame what a successful season looks like. Success for you might be beyond wins and losses. It might be about, again, making sure everyone has fun, that everyone comes back next season, and that you are able to teach them some things and build their character as well as young humans. You can also then frame this for parents and start to sort of use this to steer your goals and your standards. So if you have expectations of the kids that you're coaching, maybe around being at training on time, getting to games 15 minutes early, you can frame these around getting the parents to help you make this a successful season by helping their child meet the standards of being in the team. Now, despite good intent, parents at times may want to, discuss certain things with you. It might be around court time or around that their child is having issues with other kids in the team. It's important that you try and, keep communication lines open, but do establish clear boundaries, such as a 24-hour rule where parents know that after a game, if they have any issues with the way that you coached or anything like that, they need to wait at least 24 hours before reaching out. Usually that means that by the time that you do get to speak to them, they may have calmed down a bit from the emotions of the moment. And it's important to check your club might also have some similar rules in place, or maybe even some rules that are longer, like a 48-hour rule as well. I'd also, in the first few weeks of the season, be getting to know my players and learn something, outside basketball about them, something they like to do on weekends, their favorite football team, but something that you can use to sort of connect. And, in that 5 minutes before training or before a game, you can ask them something about, their lives. And that's a really good way to help you become a better coach as well, is to know your athletes a little better. And finally, I'd encourage you to set clear expectations on behavior. Make that really clear, whether it's in writing or some sort of mantra at the start of each training session. With a lot of under 10s and 12s in particular, you'll want to help them understand the difference between fun, which is certainly encouraged within the training session, and silliness, which is what we don't want to happen within the training session. And kids have a really good understanding of what is fun versus silly. So you can, if you help them draw that distinction, they'll be able to then, tell you quite clearly when they've gone into becoming silly. And, you can also use tools around reinforcing that school rules are no different to what that you expect in the training session as well. So all the things they do with their teachers and respecting their teachers should be expected of them within the domestic basketball environment as well. So now a little bit on around being child-centered and child-safe, particularly when we talk about child safety. It's around meeting our legal responsibilities to our players, as well as just providing great experiences as well. But certainly there is a lot of some new laws and things like that, and so we'll give you some tips on how to make sure you're staying ahead of Basketball Victoria's child safeguarding policy and all those other things as well. So what does child-centered mean? It means when we're coaching, we've coached the kids that are in front of us. We recognize that, remember why they play, which is for fun. Fun can mean a range of different things to kids, but, fundamentally, they play to be with friends, to master new skills, to try their best, and then just enjoy the sport. And sometimes I think as coaches, we need to remember that, it's often the parents that drive that love of grades and finals and ladders. That's not necessarily the player and the athlete's priority, particularly at those younger ages as well. So it's really important that we keep it child-centered. Our goal as a coach, if we're successful, is to try and build the 4 C's in our athletes. So these are things like connection, the ability to, or that they are making new friends within the team. They feel more connected to their coach, to their teammates, to the club as well. They feel affiliated with the club. We want to build their confidence. So hopefully they're leaving the season having learnt a few new skills from you that they can go away and take on in future seasons as well. We want to build their confidence, and we want to also build their character, use this opportunity to teach the kids life skills and things they'll be able to take forward with them in their lives. So some quick pointers around, what child-safe coaching looks like. Most of these will be pretty straightforward. When we talk about language, it's really important we don't scold or yell at our players. You might get passionate during the games. Just make sure that doesn't turn into anger. Don't use discriminatory or offensive language, but absolutely do give feedback encouragingly. It doesn't mean you can't tell kids, the truth and what they need to improve on. Make sure you're doing so encouragingly and showing that you care for the athlete first and foremost. It's important that we're avoiding one-on-one situations with a child. So if you are the last family at training, or you're waiting for that child to be picked up, ask another parent if they don't mind hanging around with you until that child can be picked up. That's always a great rule of thumb. Similarly, with sort of transport to and from sessions, if there's a child who's unable to get to a game, please try and put that onus onto other parents within the team and not you as the coach. And that's a really important one to keep in mind. We do want to make sure that every kid can get to trainings and games. Just try and see if you can lean on the other parents in the group where possible. Finally, making sure we're not engaging, following, in getting involved with our athletes on social media or contacting them on WhatsApp or anything, any of those apps. Really important that we are keeping our relationship with the athlete professional. And of course, particularly for, given we're working with children, most of that communication should be happening with the parents. We want to avoid, physical contact with the child that is, unnecessary. And most of the contacts, that we'd be thinking about, in terms of putting our arms around athletes, in terms of if they get injured and, we're trying to test their ankle mobility. A lot of these are actually quite unnecessary and beyond our role as the sports coach. So just keep those things in mind in your coaching. Obviously, give plenty of high fives and fist bumps when you're coaching athletes. Great way to show encouragement and reinforce, great behaviors, build connection with your athletes, but avoiding anything that's going to cause physical harm. Again, these are all the quite obvious sort of things that are common sense for the coach, I think. Some other points as well. It's important when, avoid giving suicides, particularly with language like that, or excessive physical punishments to your athletes, and don't be giving gifts to them that could be showing favoritism. Obviously, a little chocolate to lollies or something to the group at the end of a game or something. Yes, that's entirely okay. We're talking about sort of larger gifts and to individual players that might be considered favoritism as something to definitely steer away from as a coach. So moving through to the training session now, a lot of you will be dealing with a 45-minute allocation on a half court once a week. For me, I would be recommending that means you need 5 activities to play during your session. This will mean they're going for about 8 minutes in length, and then you've got about a 1-minute drink break, or those other 5 minutes will get taken up quickly by the time you get you introduce kids to the session and you do a bit of a wrap up at the end. Included in that training session, there's some things we want to have in every single training session. So we want to have some shooting and some finishing games, finishing being layups, all the different types of other shots that might happen close to the basket. So you might have some games where kids are competing in pairs to try and do some drives, pivots, and shots. Maybe using part of your team's offense, but you're playing some competitive games out of that. We then want to move forward to what we call small-sided games, some 2-on-2, 3-on-3, 3-on-2, activities where we've got a certain focus, a certain skill we're trying to teach. This might be around spacing, around certain cuts, actions like screens or handoffs, linked, but they've got to be appropriate to the group that you've got. We do provide a range of other resources to help you with that as a coach, which we'll talk about at the end of this webinar as well. Finally, kids love to play. It's important we give them those opportunities, and they learn best through playing. So giving them some 3-on-3, 4-on-4 to finish the session, but making sure it's purposeful. So making sure that there's some rules and rewards that are linked with the objectives that you're trying to get out of the session. It's not just, the kids playing and mucking around. We're making sure we're getting something out of it as a team as well. You can see here, we're trying to make everything fun and add an energy to the session. You can do this as well by making sure everything is competitive. So even if you're just doing a shooting or a dribbling activity, you might set challenges around it. Challenges to perform as many repetitions or score as many baskets in a minute or 2 minutes. Having a time or a score or a target is really important. On the McKinnon Basketball website, we have an article, which you can see there on the right, around planning a 45-minute training session. And I've put in there 5 activities that if I could run one session for the rest of my life with domestic players, this would be the one. Some things to try and avoid when you're running your training session. Firstly, arriving without a written plan. Obviously being a volunteer, you might be coming from work, but certainly encourage you to, even if it's just on an A4 bit of paper, with the name of each activity that you're looking to run for the session, making sure you take the time before the session to do that. We want to make sure we avoid the 3 L's. So making kids run laps of the venue, having them in really long lines. So maybe if you've got a team of 8 and you have one line where 8 players are standing and one player is performing a layup, they're the sorts of things we want to avoid, because there's a lot of standing still that can become quite boring for players. So that's something we want to avoid. Try and find ways to break up and make multiple lines of maybe 2 or 3 players in each line. And finally, around lectures, we want to reduce the amount of talking in our session. Yes, you're going to be teaching, but really try and keep them into snackable bites for your players, 20 or 30-second bursts maximum, and make sure you're maximizing the amount of time that they are playing as well during the training. I recommend staying clear of elimination games. These games where, the 2-ball knockout that we all know, where it ends up with 6 kids knocked out, all sitting down watching 2 kids, play off for the win. There are plenty of other ways to get competition within your session and to feed those players competitive juices whilst keeping everyone involved and making everyone better in the group. It's also going to make your life tougher with parents, particularly if they arrive at the end of the session and they can see that there's, only 1 or 2 players participating in the activity as well. This will help your team become better shooters if everyone's shooting more often, but you'll still keep the competitive flow to your session as well. Obviously, you're going to have plays and maybe some things like, a baseline out of bounds play, but you only need 1 of those. And I wouldn't spend more than 5 minutes at training trying to put those sort of things in. Where some coaches go astray is they have way too much choreography in their trainings. Everything is about moving players around like chess pieces, and they're not actually teaching the kids to be able to play and read the game and what's in front of them. So trying to spend sort of 5 minutes of your training on those sort of tactics or choreography, and you might want to play more through different actions and things that we can talk a little bit about later on in the webinar. Finally, we probably just ask that you, particularly when we're talking about under 10s, 12s, 14s athletes in particular, avoid pigeonholing players into set positions or roles. So your tallest player doesn't always need to be the one that stands, close to the basket for the rebounds. Okay, that's going to, hamper their development in the long term. So I would encourage you trying to rotate roles where you can, with a goal that you're trying. If you've got 8 players, you're trying to build 8 players that can play the point guard spot, or 8 players that can shoot the ball, 8 players that can rebound. That doesn't mean you might not have roles at certain times, but try to rotate who's in those roles across the season. So onto what we want to be teaching. This is a really quick snapshot of the sorts of things that you can use to teach certain skills, but also the key skills that it's important you're teaching children if we're looking at that sort of beginner level of player in our club competition. So firstly, shooting. Basketball Victoria calls it the master skill. They recommend that you spend 25% of your training session working on shooting. So again, like we spoke about in one of the earlier slides, this might be starting with a game where you've got teams are in, your team is divided into pairs with a ball for each pair, and they are trying to work together to get as many shots in as they can from a variety of different spots using a variety of different finishes or drives within a certain time period. And this way you're going to get lots of activity and the kids are going to get some good repetition practicing their shooting as well. The 3 Fs that Basketball Victoria recommend is talking about having your feet set and square and balanced. And then, that gives you the right balance to shoot from. Focus, picking your target on the ring and follow through, making sure you've got that nice gooseneck, giraffe neck ready, outstretched and pointed at the ring when they're shooting. You can also use analogies when teaching shooting, like we want them to catch low and loaded. So with knees bent, hands up, we can call those hungry hands. Really be, use analogies that really, excite players and convey that message of what you're looking for. And be sure to praise the process, not the outcome. So what I mean by that is, your team works really well to create a shot. When the shot goes up, make sure to clap the ball before it's even gone through the ring or not. Okay, you need to recognize and praise players on the process they followed, not necessarily whether the shot went in or not. Passing, a few things to keep in mind is try and avoid, there's always a time for different activities, but I think passing personally needs to be practiced a lot of the time with some sort of defense. So some sort of like a keep away activity. This will help players learn how to make their pass fakes and pivots and learn how to pass under pressure, rather than those sort of choreographed 4 corners activities where you pass and follow your pass to that line. I'd encourage you to go for something a little bit more dynamic and game-based, even if it is a little more chaotic. When you're teaching dribbling and footwork, we want kids to pound the ball. We want them to really, be confident with their dribbling. We want them to be able to dribble and drive with both hands to both sides of the floor. So if you can really encourage your players and, practice on the left side as well as the right, or vice versa for a left-hander, that's going to really help them in their development. Finally, one of the key skills that'll save you a lot of, headaches on game day, the quicker you can get your players to work on it, is around their ability to stop dribbling and to pivot, without traveling. The game will be filled with loads of opportunities where they're going to start dribbling and get really excited. And then when they decide they need to stop, if you can have them being able to perform that jump stop and being able to pivot and find their pass, that might save you 4 or 5 travels in a game. Thinking about on defense now, the key things you want to be thinking about when your team loses possession of the ball. Firstly, can your players find a player? One each. They're going to be playing matchup defense for the vast majority of the game and all of the game if you are coaching under 10s through to under 14s. Can they deny their player then? So what we mean by that is maybe you're talking to them about, not letting their player catch the ball. They're going to stick to them like glue, not let their player catch the ball. But if their player does happen to catch the ball, then can they guard their player? So can they slide and, shuffle like a crab and be able to contain their player, stay between them and the basket, prevent them from driving, and do what we call walling up at the end, where they make themselves into a nice tall wall without reaching in or trying to slap the player or the ball when that player is going to shoot the ball. If they can stay disciplined like that, moving their feet first and keeping their hands out, okay, they're going to get through the game nice and disciplined without getting themselves fouled out of the game. Finally, on offense, we could do a whole separate, webinar on this, and we'd give our coaches lots of resources around the offensive side. But the key things you want to be thinking about is, can your players, when they get possession of the ball, push the ball in transition? So really try and, sprint ahead of the ball, find lanes, particularly for players are going to be trying to seek the sideline and really spread out. And then players can dribble through the middle of the court using that space, or pass ahead to them as well, trying to create really quick shots within transition. Can they recognize advantages? So can they see that, oh, I've got a 2-on-1 or a 3-on-1, so it's a good opportunity for me to drive and score. But maybe if I have 3 defenders in front of me and I'm the only player from my team, I need to wait for my other teammates to come down, and we can run something a little bit more structured and maybe get good spacing back as well. So that's a little bit about some basic skill development and tactics to be looking out for in your team. Let's move on to some of the things that you'll need to be aware of on game day. So firstly, around sort of substitutions and court time and distributing court time to your athletes. I would say around court time, firstly, refer to your domestic club for specific guidelines. They might have certain rules or guidelines to follow. Some good rules of thumb, though, that I find is, firstly, it's okay to use a subbing template, a plan that tells you, which players to sub at what times. There's a lot going on during the game. So it's all right to have that in a spreadsheet. There's plenty of tools online that can help you sort of make those up to be giving equal court time across the game. I recommend avoiding having set starting fives within your group. Kids will pick up where they're sitting in the hierarchy. If you're someone who likes to put their strongest 5 on to start the game, that's going to quickly backfire on you probably as you start to make a few subs, and you might have all those players off at a certain time. You're going to find your momentum going in, peaks and troughs across the game as well. We must give fair court time. Now, the fair, you might have different definitions on what that looks like, but really important for the vast majority of domestic, competition, we need to recognise it's not the NBA or the WNBA. We need to make sure we're giving kids fair opportunity and adequate opportunity to improve. The only kid that, gets better is the one that comes back. So make sure if there are reasons you're thinking of, giving a player less court time, maybe you think they've been misbehaving in training, don't let the court time be the way they find out about it. Talk to their parents, use them as an ally, and talk to them about the behavior, and ask them for their help before you have to start reducing their court time as a result. In terms of timeouts, in the McKinnon domestic competition, you receive 1 timeout per half. You do also get an opportunity to have a bonus timeout in the last 3 minutes of the second half. Okay, that's only if you've already used your timeout for that half earlier on. So when might you use a timeout? Well, it's a great opportunity to, teach athletes, reinforce the things you've talked about at training, and to maybe shift the momentum. Maybe the other team's scored a few points in a row and you want to just try and stop that momentum, or maybe you want to try and keep the momentum your team has. You can request one on any whistle, and you can also grab one if you're quick and polite enough after your opponent scores as well, before your team passes the ball in. Some coaching etiquette. These aren't necessarily, hard and fast rules, but they're things that I think if we all do within the McKinnon Basketball Association, we will be, much better off and work together better as a coaching group. The first one is around finishing training on time. So if your training finishes at 5:30, and making sure you are off in advance of that time. If that means you've got a shooting game and the kids haven't quite hit the winning score yet, it doesn't matter. You need to be off the court, ready for the next coach to start their practice session there. It also helps the parents who are there to pick up their kids make sure they can pick them up on time and be ready for their next appointment after that, potentially. After on game day, when you've finished the game, please make sure you leave it as clean as you found it, picking up drink bottles and leaving the bench straight away, so that the next team after you can come in and put their gear down. Okay, don't do your post-game chat at the team benches. Take them away to a quiet corner of the court to do that chat. Always make sure you thank the referees and the scorers post-game. Even if you're a little bit frustrated and you may not think they had the best day, always make sure you thank them and give the referees a fist bump or shake their hand on the way through as well. I'd really recommend, don't address other teams' players. Don't get engaged in, verbal conversation or try to coach them or anything like that. You've got your team, the other coach has their team, and just keep those, boundaries really, really separate. The fifth one is around the respectful use of timeouts. And I guess what I mean by this is if you're leading by 30 points and there's a minute to go in the game, don't treat your opposition like training cones and call a timeout to sort of, draw up a certain play or something like that. Like the game's done and dusted. Maybe you can communicate things through a sub or different things, but that's just a little bit of etiquette that I think goes a long way. And finally, we'll talk about no zoning in the half court in a moment, but teams may, at younger age groups or any age group, look to set full court traps in an extended pressure up the court. This is not to say don't do that. It certainly can have a place within junior basketball. What I would suggest though is to teams that are thinking about doing that for the whole game is maybe if you're using some full court pressure and trapping, that you're using that for a few minutes to create an advantage and then changing to something different like a full court matchup or a half court matchup out of that, rather than being the team that's sitting in that for the full 4 quarters. Making sure that we're using it lightly and sporadically, along with other things like a full court matchup or a half court matchup. But I guess it's time now to talk about our no zone rules and our no zone rules specifically within the McKinnon Basketball Association domestic program. So if you are coaching a team of under 10s, 12s, 14s, you must use matchup defense principles when defending a team in the half court. Okay, you cannot play zone defense. From under 16s and plus, teams are welcome to use that as part of their toolkit, but not at under 10s through 14s. Okay, so this means we're going to be teaching kids about matchup, and some of the key principles you should be thinking about is when they're guarding a player who has the ball, making sure that they are touch distance, so close enough that they could sort of touch the ball if they wanted to. They don't necessarily need to be quite that close, but that's a good rule of thumb. We'll talk an example about when that, how far away you shouldn't be in a moment. Making sure that when if you're guarding a player who doesn't have the ball, you're almost creating a bit of a triangle and you can point your fingers and see the ball and your player as well as you as well. The key shouldn't really be a camping area for players. Now it does depend on where the player you're defending is standing and if they're moving around as well. But you don't want to be instructing a certain player to just stand in the one spot in the middle of the key because you're worried that the other team is going to be able to drive and score through. Okay, the onus is on you as a coach to be able to teach your players to contain and match up one-on-one. If you believe the opposition is playing a zone, you know what? Before I come to that, let's have a look at the example on the screen here. So on the screen, you can see players 1, 2, 3, and 5 for the offense are spread out around the 3-point line here. You can see that player number 4 is around the left-hand side of the court on the block. And X, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are the defenders. So you can see I've got ticks and crosses here according to who I think is in a good position and who is in a position that would likely be called a zoning position. So X2 and X1 are fine for me because they are relative to where the ball is with number 5. They are in that sort of shallow triangle that you can see. They're not really deep. They're in a position where as soon as the ball's passed to their player, they could be there when the ball's caught and be able to defend their player one-on-one. Player 4, X4, similarly, I'm happy with where that player is standing because, again, their player is, opposite the ball close to the basket. So they are, across, they're jumping on the split line there. And again, they're sort of in line with their player and the ball as well. X5, I do have an issue with. His player or her player has the ball at the 3-point line and they are standing pretty much in the key. Okay, so they're standing way more than touch distance off and, just almost waiting for that player to try to drive towards the basket. So we'd encourage that player to come out and try and defend that player a little closer. Similarly, or with X3, you can see that their player is a long way away on the right-hand side. Now, they're standing under the basket at the moment, despite the fact that their player is not only standing alone on the three-point line, but they are sprinting up to catch the ball. So if they're cutting, we're expecting to see X3 move with that and be somewhere more like where X2 is on the court, where they're a little bit closer to their player there. If you believe it can sometimes, it's not always a perfect, art or obvious if there's a zone or not. If you believe the opposition is playing a zone during a game and you're coaching in these age groups, first of all, remember that no action can be taken in the moment by you or the referees. So please don't bring it up with the referees or try and address the other coach. Simply ask someone from your team, maybe a parent or a team manager, to start filming the game and then submit that video to your club, who will then raise it with the competition manager as well. Finally, and really importantly, it's important that we respect the referees. Our competition is dependent on the fact that we have, referees that are able to perform their job safely and do their best job. So really important for you as a coach to, recognize your responsibility. Firstly, let them do their job. Teach your players and model yourself about controlling the controllables. You can't control what they call, and you might have seen something differently, but you've just got to let them, do their job and focus on what you can control. It's important also to remember that most referees within our competition, a large number of them, are minors. They are aged under the age of 18. So your interactions with them need to be following the same principles of the child safety things we spoke about earlier, okay? If you are, abusive or, amassing activities and behaviors that would be considered abusive towards that referee, it does also fall under child safety legislation. You may be facing sort of some, consequences around that as well. So please make sure you're modeling respect and patience for your parents and players. It's hard sometimes when your parents get in the heat of the moment and they start, arguing with the referees. We really want you to try to be a leader and model those behaviors and tell them to model that patience and respect as well. If you are in any exchanges with referees across the game, a few principles to remember is right time, right place. It is not appropriate to be yelling across the court to them. Okay, you might like to wait for a calmer moment, potentially at the end of the timeout or during the halftime break. You should always be approaching referees with a calm tone. Pleases and thank yous go a long way here, okay? So sometimes you don't want to bring something up in the heat of the moment or get clarity on something. You need to make sure you're taking a deep breath and approaching with a calm tone. And finally, you always need to make sure you're using questions, not statements. And by this, I mean, how is that a foul? That is not a question. That's a rhetorical one. And you're not actually after any sort of clarity or looking to, frame things as a teacher from your side of things. So always make sure we're respectful in that way. And at the end of the day, focus on what we can control the controllables, and respect the referees. Finally, some recommended resources for you as a coach within our program. Some resources I'd direct you to. There's so many available, online these days. Firstly, the McKinnon Basketball website. We have a coaches section where we're building out some blogs, some videos that we're pulling from a range of different areas that will help you with some ideas on how to coach your team best. We also deliver some coaching clinics. Keep your eyes on social media for opportunities to attend some of those workshops and clinics that we're going to be doing on a range of different areas. If you'd like to do a coaching accreditation course, certainly recommend those. The community level and the club level are the first two levels. They're both really appropriate for the domestic coach, and you can find details of those on the McKinnon Basketball website and our coach education calendar there as well. Basketball Australia have a great coaches website with a range of different blogs, videos of clinics from around the country that you are welcome to check out. I find the Mojo app is a really great tool as well. It's got some great activities that are put into really snackable 1 minute segments for you to look at. You can even, for free, plan your team's activities, so you can put in how many kids you have at training, how many basketballs you're going to have, if you have cones or not, and it will spit you out a great training session that you can deliver each week for your athletes as well. Finally, there's a range of different podcasts that you can listen to. Around the Den is McKinnon's podcast. We have occasionally some good coaching content around that, as well as all things happening within the McKinnon Basketball Association. Talking Split is Basketball Victoria's podcast. Love that one. And there's plenty of others that you can, discover as well as a coach. So we've covered a little bit of ground there, but again, most importantly, I just want to thank you for your role as a coach within one of our clubs here at the McKinnon Basketball Association. We really value the work that you do trying to give kids a positive experience through basketball. If you do have any questions that you'd like to ask me, again, please feel free to reach out at my email, doc@mckinnonbasketball.org, and we look forward to seeing you around the stadium sometime soon.